The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly under the pale morning sun of 1882, its vastness both beautiful and unforgiving. Sam Carter stood on the weathered porch of his ranch house, his weathered hands gripping a cup of bitter coffee, as he surveyed the rolling hills that had been his home for 15 years. At 43, his face bore the deep lines of a man who had seen too much loss, his once bright blue eyes now dulled by grief. 3 months had passed since his wife Martha's death from pneumonia, leaving him alone with their 12-year-old son, Thomas, and a ranch that demanded more than one broken man could give. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, unaware that their owner's heart had died alongside the woman who had made this harsh land feel like paradise. "Pa, the fence by Miller's Creek is down again," Thomas called from the barn, his voice carrying the premature responsibility of a boy forced to grow up too quickly. The child had Martha's gentle spirit but Sam's stubborn determination, and watching him struggle to fill the void left by his mother's absence was a daily reminder of Sam's failures as both husband and father. Sam nodded silently, knowing that broken fence was just another item on an endless list of repairs that seemed to multiply each day. The ranch hands had moved on to better opportunities months ago, unable to wait for wages that came sporadically from a man whose heart wasn't in the work anymore. Now it was just Sam, Thomas, and the ghosts of better times. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted his melancholy, and Sam squinted against the morning light to see Sheriff Coleman riding up the dusty path. The lawman's expression was grim, never a good sign in these parts where tensions between settlers and the local Shoshone tribe had been escalating for months. "Morning," Sam Coleman called, dismounting with the careful movements of a man whose joints had suffered through too many Wyoming winters. "Got some news you need to hear." "Morning, Sheriff. Coffee's fresh if you want some," Sam offered, though his tone suggested he'd rather be left alone with his misery. Coleman accepted gratefully, his weathered face etched with concern. "There's been more trouble up north. The Wilkins family found their cattle scattered and their water trough poisoned. They're blaming the Shoshone, saying it's retaliation for the government's new treaty negotiations." Sam's jaw tightened. He'd heard the rumors, the growing hysteria among some settlers who saw every misfortune as an act of war. Any proof it was them? None whatsoever. But you know how folks get when they're scared. There's talk of forming a militia, maybe taking matters into their own hands. Coleman's eyes met Sam's. "I'm hoping cooler heads will prevail, but I wanted to warn you. Your ranch is closest to the reservation boundary. If things escalate... The unfinished sentence hung heavy in the morning air. Sam knew what the sheriff meant. Violence had a way of spreading like wildfire in the territory, consuming everything in its path regardless of guilt or innocence. "I appreciate the warning," Sam said finally. "Thomas and I will keep our eyes open." As Coleman rode away, Sam felt the familiar weight of isolation pressing down on him. Martha had always been the bridge between their family and the outside world, her natural warmth making allies of neighbors and strangers alike. Without her, Sam found himself increasingly cut off from a community that seemed to grow more paranoid and hostile with each passing day. The afternoon brought no relief from his troubles. While mending the broken fence Thomas had reported, Sam's thoughts wandered to Martha's gentle wisdom about their native neighbors. She had always insisted that fear bred more fear, that understanding required courage most people didn't possess. Standing alone in the vast Wyoming landscape, Sam wondered if he possessed that courage himself, or if Martha's death had taken that from him too. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Sam had made his way back to the house where Thomas waited with their simple supper. The boy had grown quieter since his mother's death, his natural curiosity dampened by grief and premature responsibility. Sam knew he should try harder to reach his son, to bridge the gap that seemed to widen each day, but the words never came. "Easily anymore," Puss Thomas said quietly as they ate their beans and cornbread. "Do you think Ma would want us to stay here?" The question hit Sam like a physical blow. He studied his son's face, seeing Martha's features reflected in the boy's earnest expression. "This was her home, son. She loved this land. But she loved us more," Thomas replied with the devastating honesty of childhood. "And we're not happy here anymore." Sam had no answer for that truth, no comfort to offer a child who had already learned that life could be cruel and unpredictable. As darkness settled over the ranch, father and son sat in the comfortable silence of shared sorrow, neither knowing that tomorrow would bring a encounter that would change everything they thought they knew about courage, compassion, and the unexpected bridges that connect all human hearts. Dawn broke gray and cold over the Carter Ranch, with storm clouds gathering on the northern horizon like an omen of troubles to come. Sam had barely finished his morning chores when he heard it, the sound that would haunt him for years too. It was a keening wail, raw with desperation and pain, carried on the wind from somewhere beyond the ridge that marked the boundary between his land and the reservation territory. Thomas emerged from the barn, his face pale with concern. "Pa, what was that?" Sam strained his ears, catching fragments of what sounded like a woman's voice calling in a language he didn't understand. The cries were becoming weaker, more desperate, and something deep in his chest, perhaps the last, the remnant of the man Martha had fallen in love with, stirred to life. "Stay here," he told Thomas, but the boy was already shaking his head. "I'm coming with you. Pom, I always said we help folks in trouble, no matter who they are." The reminder of Martha's words hit Sam like a physical blow, but he nodded. Together, they saddled their horses and rode toward the sound of distress. Following a faint trail that led up into the rocky hills where few white men ventured, they found them in a small clearing sheltered by tall pines. A Shoshone woman, perhaps 30 years old, kneeling beside a small figure wrapped in colorful blankets. The woman's long black hair was disheveled, her traditional dress torn and stained with travel. When she saw Sam and Thomas approaching, she tensed like a cornered animal, her dark eyes flashing with a mixture of fear, defiance, and desperate hope. The bundle in her arms stirred, and Sam caught a glimpse of a child's face, a girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, burning with fever and breathing in short, labored gasps. The woman spoke rapidly in her native tongue, gesturing between the child and Sam with increasing urgency. "She's asking for help," Thomas said quietly, and Sam was surprised by his son's certainty. "You understand her?" "No, but look at her face. PA same way Ma looked when she was begging the doctor to save me from that fever 2 years back." The comparison was apt and heartbreaking. Sam dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements non-threatening. The woman watched him with the intensity of a hawk, ready to flee or fight at the first sign of danger. "Easy," Sam said, softly, the same tone he used with spooked horses. "We want to help." The woman's eyes darted between Sam and Thomas, calculating odds and weighing risks. When the child in her arms convulsed with a particularly violent cough, her decision was made. She spoke again, this time pointing toward Sam's ranch, her meaning clear. Despite the language barrier, Sam knelt beside the woman and gently placed his hand on the child's forehead. The girl was burning up, her small face flushed with dangerous fever. In her delirium, she mumbled words he couldn't understand, but her distress was universal. He thought of Martha, of all the times she had nursed Thomas through childhood illnesses with patience and skill. "Pneumonia," he said quietly, recognizing the symptoms that had claimed his wife. "Maybe worse." The woman nodded, understanding his tone, if not his words. She had seen this sickness before, had perhaps lost others to its relentless grip. Her eyes held the same desperate fear Sam remembered from his own recent vigil beside Martha's bedside. Without another word, Sam gathered the child into his arms. She was frighteningly light, her small body radiating heat through the blankets. The woman rose beside him, ready to defend her daughter if necessary, but Sam's gentle handling seemed to reassure her. "Thomas, ride ahead and clear the spare room. Get the medicine box from the kitchen shelf," Sam instructed. His son nodded and spurred his horse toward home, leaving Sam to carefully transport the sick child while her mother walked alongside, never taking her watchful eyes off the precious burden. The ride back to the ranch seemed endless. The child's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute, and Sam found himself praying to a God he'd barely spoken to since Martha's death. The Shoshone woman maintained her vigil on foot, matching the pace of his horse with the tireless endurance of her people, her lips moving in what he assumed were prayers of her own. By the time they reached the ranch house, Thomas had prepared everything as instructed. The spare room, Martha's sewing room, which Sam had avoided for months, was ready with fresh linens, and the precious bottle of laudanum that had been prescribed for Martha's final days. Sam carried the child inside while her mother hesitated. At the threshold, clearly torn between trust and the deeply ingrained wariness of her people toward white settler homes, it was Thomas who solved the dilemma, appearing beside her with Martha's favorite quilt. "For her," he said simply, offering the quilt with the same natural kindness his mother had possessed. The gesture seemed to decide the woman. She followed them inside, her eyes taking in the modest but clean interior of the Carter home. Sam laid the child on the bed and stepped back, allowing her mother to take the place of primary caregiver while he provided what assistance he could. The next hours blurred together in a haze of fever-fighting remedies and anxious watching. Sam found himself drawing on every technique Martha had used during Thomas's illness: cool cloths for the fever, small spoonfuls of water to prevent dehydration, and the precious laudanum to ease the child's labored breathing. The woman proved to be a skilled caregiver herself, producing small packets of what appeared to be medicinal herbs from a leather pouch at her waist. She brewed teas that filled the room with unfamiliar but pleasant aromas, and sang soft songs in her native language that seemed to comfort the delirious child. As evening approached and the child's fever finally began to break, Sam realized he had spent the entire day working alongside a woman whose name he didn't know, communicating through gestures and shared concern for an innocent life hanging in the balance. It was the first time since Martha's death that he had felt truly useful, truly connected to something larger than his own grief. The woman looked up at him across the child's sleeping form, and for the first time her expression held something other than wariness. In halting but clear English, she spoke the first words she had addressed directly to him. "My daughter lives because of your kindness. I am called Ayana. She is Kimimela, little butterfly." Sam nodded, understanding the trust implicit in her, sharing their names. "I'm Sam Carter, this is my son, Thomas." Ayanna studied Thomas with new interest, perhaps seeing in the boy's earlier compassion an echo of his mother's teachings. "Your woman taught him well." "She did," Sam agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "She would have done the same thing you're doing, fought to save her child." As night fell over the Carter ranch, three cultures, white settler, grieving widower, and protective mother had found common ground in the universal language of healing and hope. None of them could have predicted how this single act of compassion would ripple outward, changing not just their own lives but the fate of an entire community balanced on the knife's edge of conflict and understanding. Little Butterfly's fever broke just after midnight, but Ayanna remained vigilant beside her daughter's bed, singing soft healing songs in the Shoshone language while Sam dozed fitfully in Martha's old rocking chair by the window. Thomas had fallen, asleep on the floor wrapped in a blanket, stubbornly refusing to leave despite his father's repeated suggestions that he get proper rest in his own bed. The house felt different with these strangers in it, warmer somehow, filled with purpose, in a way it hadn't been since Martha's death. Sam found himself thinking about his wife's stories of the early days when tensions between settlers and native tribes weren't so bitter, when mutual respect and occasional friendship had been possible despite cultural differences. Around 3 in the morning, Kimmy Mela stirred and opened her eyes for the first time since they'd brought her to the ranch. Her voice was barely a whisper as she spoke to her mother in their native tongue, but Ayanna's relief was immediate and profound. She pressed her hand to the child's forehead and smiled, the first genuine smile Sam had seen from her. "The fever is gone," Ayanna said quietly, not wanting to wake Thomas. "She asks for water." Sam moved quietly to fetch a cup of cool well water, and watched as Ayanna helped her daughter take small, careful sips. Kimmy Mela's eyes, dark and bright like her mother's, studied Sam with the frank curiosity of childhood unmarred by adult prejudices. "Thank you," the little girl said in careful English, the words clearly rehearsed in her mind before she spoke them. "You're welcome, little one," Sam replied gently. "You gave us quite a scare." Over the next few hours, as dawn approached and Kimmy Mela grew stronger, Sam learned more about his unexpected guests. Ayanna was the daughter of a medicine woman and the widow of a respected warrior, who had died 2 winters ago defending their people during a cavalry raid on a peaceful winter camp. She and Kimmy Mela lived with Ayanna's elderly father, helping to care for him as his health declined. "We were traveling to gather sacred herbs in the high meadows when the sickness took her," Ayanna explained as they shared a simple breakfast of biscuits and honey. 3 days we traveled, and she grew worse each day. I prayed to the spirits to send help, and they sent me to your land." Thomas, energized by a few hours of sleep and the excitement of having visitors, peppered Kimmy Mela with questions about life on the reservation. Despite her recent illness, the little girl proved to be a patient teacher, describing the seasons of her people, their traditional games, and the stories her grandfather told around the winter fires. "My grandfather says the spirits of this land remember when all people lived in harmony," Kimmy Mela said, her English careful but clear. Before the angry times came, Sam felt a pang of recognition in those words. There had indeed been a time, in the early days of his marriage to Martha, when isolated acts of kindness between settlers and native people weren't unheard of. But years of government policies, broken treaties, and mutual misunderstandings had hardened hearts on both sides. As the morning progressed, Sam found himself reluctant to see his guests leave. Ayanna had made it clear that they would return to their people as soon as Kimmy Mela was strong enough to travel, but something about their presence had awakened feelings he'd thought died with Martha. Not romantic feelings. The grief for his wife was still too raw for that, but a sense of connection, of purpose beyond mere survival. Pa Thomas said as he helped clear the breakfast dishes, "Do you think Kimmy Mela could teach me some words in her language?" Before Sam could answer, the sound of approaching horses interrupted the peaceful morning. Through the kitchen window, Sam could see Sheriff Coleman riding up with 2 other men, Frank Wheeler and Dutch Harrison, both known throughout the territory for their aggressive stance toward the local tribes. Sam's blood ran cold. If these men discovered Ayanna and Kimmy Mela in his house, the consequences could be devastating for everyone involved. The territorial tensions were too high, the prejudices too deeply entrenched. "Upstairs," he said quietly to Ayanna, who had already sensed the danger. "Both of you, stay quiet until they leave." Ayanna gathered Kimmy Mela without argument, understanding the threat even without knowing the specific men involved. Sam waited until he heard the soft sound of the upstairs, the door closing before walking out to meet his unwelcome visitors. "Morning, Sheriff," Sam called, hoping his voice sounded casual. "What brings you out this way so early?" Coleman's expression was grim, and the 2 men with him looked ready for trouble. "We're tracking some stolen cattle, Sam. Trail leads right through your property toward the reservation boundary." "Haven't seen any cattle that don't belong here," Sam replied truthfully. "You're welcome to look around if you need to." Frank Wheeler, a man whose hatred for native people was well known throughout the territory, spat into the dust. "We know they're working with rustlers now. Probably planned the whole thing during one of their so-called hunting trips onto our land." Frank, You don't know that, Coleman said wearily, but his protest lacked conviction, don't I? My brother lost 20 head last month, and we found moccasin tracks near where they cut the fence. These savages are getting bolder, Coleman. Time we showed them what happens when they steal from white folks. Sam felt his jaw clench, thinking of the gentle woman and innocent child hiding upstairs. The ugly words, the casual hatred, the complete absence of any attempt to understand or communicate. It all seemed so pointless and destructive. Maybe if we tried talking to them instead of assuming the worst, Sam said carefully, we might find out what's really happening. Wheeler's eyes narrowed. You've gone soft on them, Carter. Your wife always was too friendly with the savages. Maybe that's rubbing off on you. The insult to Martha's memory hit Sam like a physical blow, and for a moment he saw red. Only the knowledge that Ayanna and Kimimela were depending on his discretion kept him from doing something that would make the situation infinitely worse. My wife was a Christian woman who believed in treating all people with respect, Sam said evenly. Maybe you should try reading your Bible sometime, Frank. Dutch Harrison, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. We ain't here to debate religion, Carter. You see any Indians on your property, you send word immediately. Same goes for any missing cattle. The territorial governor's getting pressure from Washington to maintain order, and that means keeping the reservation Indians where they belong. After the men left, Sam waited a full hour before calling upstairs for Ayanna and Kimimela to come down. Ayanna's face was pale but determined when she appeared in the kitchen doorway. We heard their words, she said quietly. This is why our people fear yours, why they speak of war instead of peace. Men like those see us as less than human. Not all of us, Sam said, though he knew how hollow the word sounded given what they'd just witnessed. No, Ayanna agreed, looking at him with something that might have been the beginning of trust. Not all, but enough to make survival very dangerous for people like us who would choose a different path. As they prepared for her departure, for both knew that staying longer would only increase the danger to everyone involved, Sam felt something shift inside him. The isolation and grief that had consumed him since Martha's death was still there, but it no longer felt like the whole story of his life. He had been reminded that there were things worth fighting for beyond his own pain, connections worth preserving despite the risks. If you ever need help again, he told Ayanna as she prepared to leave with Kimimela, you know where to find me. Ayanna nodded, understanding the weight of what he offered. In a territory increasingly defined by suspicion and hatred, such promises carried the potential for both salvation and destruction. Neither of them could have imagined that within 24 hours Sam would discover just how far he was willing to go to honor those words, or how profoundly his act of simple human kindness would transform not just his own life, but the fate of two communities balanced on the edge of war. The sun had barely crested the eastern hills when Sam woke to the sound of singing, not the familiar hymns Martha used to hum while making breakfast, but something entirely different. Multiple voices, women's voices, carrying on the morning air in harmonies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Thomas was already awake, standing at his bedroom window with wide eyes. Pa, come look at this. Sam joined his son at the window and felt his breath catch in his throat. Surrounding his ranch house in an enormous circle were dozens of Shoshone women, all dressed in their finest traditional clothing, beaded dresses that caught the early morning light, intricate jewelry that spoke of generations of skilled craftsmanship, and hair ornaments made from eagle feathers and colored stones. They were dancing, not the war dances that filled the nightmares of paranoid settlers, but something altogether different. Their movements were graceful, reverent, celebratory. They carried bundles of sage and sweetgrass that they waved in blessing over his fields, his cattle, his home. Some scattered what appeared to be seeds or corn pollen as they moved, their voices rising and falling in ancient melodies that spoke of gratitude and protection. What are they doing? Thomas whispered, though somehow it felt wrong to speak loudly. In the presence of such beauty, Sam could only shake his head in wonder. He had never seen anything like this, had never even heard stories of such a ceremony being performed on a white settler's land. As he watched, he began to pick out individual faces among the dancers. Older women with silver-streaked hair who moved with the dignity of matrons, younger mothers who danced while carrying babies on their backs, teenage girls whose movements held the promise of their own future wisdom, and there, near the center of the circle, was Ayanna. She wore a dress of white buckskin decorated with hundreds of tiny blue and white beads that formed patterns of flowers and butterflies. Her long black hair was braided with ribbons and small silver ornaments that caught the light with every step. When she saw Sam watching from the window, she smiled and raised her hand in greeting, never breaking the rhythm of the dance. Beside her, looking healthy and strong, danced little Kimimela in a smaller version of her mother's dress. The child's recovery was complete, her face glowing with joy as she participated in whatever sacred ceremony was unfolding around the Carter Ranch. I think, Sam said slowly, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing, they're blessing our land. The dancing continued for perhaps an hour, the women moving in intricate patterns that seemed to encompass every corner of Sam's property. They blessed his water well, his barn, his cattle pens, and his fields with the same careful attention they might give to their own sacred spaces. Some of the older women paused to touch the fence posts and buildings with their hands, speaking words in their native language that sounded like prayers. As the ceremony reached its conclusion, the women began to form a single line leading toward the ranch house. One by one, they approached the front porch where Sam and Thomas now stood, each woman placing a small gift on the wooden steps before moving on. There were bundles of medicinal herbs, small carved figurines of animals, beaded pouches containing what might have been seeds or sacred materials, and intricate weavings made from grass and colored threads. The last to approach was an elderly woman, who moved with the careful dignity of great age. Her hair was completely white, braided with shells and polished stones, and her dress was the most elaborate of all, a masterpiece of beadwork that must have taken years to complete. She carried a staff topped with feathers and seemed to radiate an authority that marked her as someone of great importance among her people. She spoke directly to Sam in accented but clear English, her voice carrying the weight of formal ceremony. "I am Grandmother Winona, keeper of the old ways for our people. We come to honor the debt of life." Sam stepped forward, feeling the weight of the moment. "I don't understand." The old woman smiled, her weathered face creasing into lines that we spoke of much laughter and hard-earned wisdom. "My granddaughter Ayana tells us you saved the life of little Butterfly when our medicine could not help her. Among our people, such a debt can only be repaid with great ceremony." She gestured toward the gifts covering his porch steps. "These are not payment, white man. They are prayers made visible. Prayers for your health, your prosperity, your protection from those who would do you harm. Each woman here has blessed your land with her own medicine, her own connection to the spirits of this place." Thomas stepped forward, his young face serious with the weight of what he was witnessing. "What does it mean?" Grandmother Winona studied the boy with ancient eyes that seemed to see far more than his physical appearance. "It means, young one, that this land is now protected by the prayers of many grandmothers. It means that the spirits of this place know you as friends to the people. It means that, as long as you honor the gift of life you gave to little Butterfly, this land will know abundance." Sam felt something shift deep in his chest, not just gratitude, though that was certainly present, but something closer to awe. These women had risked potential conflict with territorial authorities, had invested hours in elaborate ceremony, had given precious gifts, all because he had done what any decent person would do when faced with a sick child. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "Say nothing," the old woman replied gently. "Live well. Care for your son as you cared for our daughter. Remember that the earth sees no difference between red children and white children, only human hearts that beat with the same hopes and fears." As the women began to depart, moving in small groups back toward the reservation boundary, Ayana approached with Kimimela. The little girl ran directly to Thomas, chattering excitedly in a mixture of English and Shoshone about the ceremony and her part in it. "She wants to know if you felt the blessing," Ayana translated with amusement. "She says the spirits were very happy with your family this morning." Sam looked around at his transformed property, the same buildings and fields he had seen every day for 15 years, but somehow different now. The gifts on his porch seemed to glow in the morning sunlight, and the very air felt cleaner, more alive. "I felt something," he said honestly. "I'm not sure what to call it." "Hope," Ayana said simply. "You felt hope. It has been missing from this place for too long." After the last of the women had disappeared over the ridge, Sam and Thomas spent the morning carefully collecting and examining their gifts. Each item seemed to tell a story. The medicinal herbs spoke of healing and care, the carved animals represented protection and abundance. The weavings contained patterns that seemed to dance with life and movement. "Path," Thomas said as they arranged the gifts on Martha's old hope chest. "Do you think Ma would have liked this?" Sam considered the question, thinking of his wife's gentle spirit and her belief in the fundamental goodness of all people. "I think she would have loved it, son. She always said that kindness creates more kindness, like ripples in a pond." As the day progressed, Sam found himself looking at his land with new eyes. The cattle seemed more content, the grass appeared greener, and even the ever-present Wyoming wind felt gentler against his face. He knew it was probably imagination, the power of ceremony and community working on his long-isolated mind, but the feeling of change was undeniable. What he couldn't know was that Sheriff Coleman had already received reports of the morning's ceremony from several concerned citizens who had observed the proceedings from distant hills. Frank Wheeler and Dutch Harrison were already planning their response to what they saw as an unprecedented act of defiance and collaboration between a white settler and the reservation Indians. The blessing ceremony that had filled Sam's heart with hope and wonder had also lit a fuse that would soon threaten to destroy everything the dancing women had sought to protect. In the volatile atmosphere of territorial Wyoming, even acts of pure gratitude and spiritual blessing could be twisted into justifications for violence and retribution. The real test of the morning's sacred ceremony was yet to come. 3 days after the blessing ceremony, Sheriff Coleman arrived at Sam's ranch with a face like storm clouds and news that turned the morning cold despite the warm September sunshine. He accepted Sam's offer of coffee but left it untouched on the kitchen table, his weathered hands clasped tightly together as he struggled to find the right words. "Sam, I'll be straight with you. There's trouble brewing, and somehow you've landed right in the middle of it." Sam felt his stomach drop, though he'd been expecting this visit since the morning of the ceremony. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that gets people killed if we're not careful," Coleman replied grimly. "Frank Wheeler's been talking to anyone who'll listen about that Indian ceremony on your land. He's convinced half the territory that you're collaborating with hostile tribes, maybe even helping them plan raids." Thomas, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the kitchen with a defiant expression that reminded Sam painfully of Martha. "That's stupid. They were just saying thank you." "I know that, son," Coleman said gently. "And you know that. But fear makes people stupid, and there's a lot of fear going around right now." Sam studied the sheriff's face, reading the deeper concern. There's more, isn't there?" Coleman nodded reluctantly. "Yesterday, the Hendricks family found their water well poisoned and their grain stores contaminated. This morning, the Pattersons discovered their prize bull dead with what looked like arrow wounds. Could be coincidence, could be someone's trying to stir up trouble, or it could be retaliation for the blessing ceremony," Sam finished. "Someone who doesn't want peace between whites and Indians. That's what I'm afraid of. And if that's the case, Sam, you and Thomas are in real danger." Wheeler's organized a group of men who call themselves the Territorial Defense Committee, and they're talking about making examples of anyone they consider Indian sympathizers. The phrase "making examples" carried ugly implications that made Sam's blood run cold. He'd heard stories from other territories where similar groups had taken the law into their own hands, leaving families destroyed and communities torn apart by violence and vigilante justice. "What do you suggest I do?" Sam asked, though he already suspected he wouldn't like the answer. "Pack up and leave. Take Thomas and head east until this blows over." "I can't guarantee your safety if you stay." The suggestion hit Sam like a physical blow. This ranch represented everything he and Martha had built together, every dream they'd shared, every sacrifice they'd made to create a home in this harsh but beautiful land. The idea of abandoning it felt like abandoning Martha's memory. "This is my home," he said quietly. "Martha's buried in the hill behind the house. I can't just leave her." Coleman's expression softened with understanding and frustration. "Sam, Martha's gone. You and Thomas are still alive, and I'd like to keep it that way." Before Sam could respond, the sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Through the kitchen window, they could see a large group of riders cresting the ridge, at least a dozen men, all armed, led by Frank Wheeler on his distinctive black gelding. "Stay inside," Coleman ordered, standing and checking his sidearm. "Let me handle this." But Sam was already moving toward the door. "This is my property, Sheriff. These are my decisions to make." The confrontation that followed would be talked about in the territory for years to come. Wheeler and his men arranged themselves in a semicircle facing the ranch house, their weapons prominently displayed but not yet drawn. The message was clear. They had come for a reckoning. "Carter," Wheeler called out, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. "You need to answer for what you've done." Sam stepped onto his porch, acutely aware of Thomas, watching from the window behind him. "What exactly am I supposed to have done, Frank? Don't play innocent with us. The whole territory knows you harbored savages in your house. Let them perform their heathen rituals on your land. Now white families are under attack, and it's your fault for encouraging them." "I helped a sick child," Sam replied evenly. "Just like any Christian man would do." Dutch Harrison spat into the dust. "Christian men don't consort with hostiles. Christian men protect their own kind." Sam felt anger rising in his chest, but Martha's voice seemed to whisper in his memory, her gentle insistence that hatred only bred more hatred. That someone had to be brave enough to choose a different path. "If helping a sick child makes me guilty of something," Sam said carefully, "then I guess I'm guilty, but I won't apologize for saving a little girl's life." "Noble words," Wheeler sneered. "Let's see how noble you feel when their war parties come for your scalp. You've marked yourself as a collaborator, Carter. That makes you an enemy of every decent white family in the territory." Sheriff Coleman stepped forward, his badge catching the sunlight. "That's enough, Wheeler. Sam hasn't broken any laws." "Whose side are you on, Coleman?" one of Wheeler's men called out. "The law's supposed to protect white folks, not coddle Indian lovers." The tension was escalating rapidly, and Sam could see hands moving toward gun belts. He thought of Thomas, inside the house, of Martha's grave on the hill, of the gentle ceremony that had blessed his land just 3 days ago. All of it was about to be destroyed by fear and hatred unless someone found a way to step back from the brink. "I'll make you a deal," Sam said suddenly, the words surprising even himself. Wheeler's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What kind of deal?" "Give me 2 weeks. If there are any more attacks on white families in that time, I'll leave the territory voluntarily. But if there's peace, if the attacks stop, then you have to admit that the Indians aren't the problem." The proposal hung in the air like smoke from a rifle shot. Wheeler's men exchanged glances, some nodding thoughtfully while others looked skeptical. It was a gamble that could cost Sam everything, but it might be the only way to prevent immediate bloodshed. Wheeler studied Sam for a long moment, his calculating eyes weighing the offer. And if the attacks continue, if more families suffer because you've encouraged these savages, then I'll pack up and leave, Sam repeated. You have my word. 2 weeks, Wheeler said finally. But if so much as a chicken goes missing from a white man's property, you're gone. And Carter, if I find out you're secretly communicating with the reservation, warning them about our patrols or our plans, the deal's off and you'll face the consequences. After Wheeler and his men rode away, Sheriff Coleman turned to Sam with a mixture of admiration and concern that was either very brave or very foolish. Sam, maybe both. Probably both. Sam agreed, feeling the weight of what he'd committed. Too, but it buys us time to figure out what's really happening. Coleman nodded thoughtfully. I'll do some investigating, see if I can find out who's really behind these attacks. But Sam, you need to be careful. Wheeler's not the type to honor deals if it doesn't suit his purposes. As evening fell over the ranch, Sam found himself standing on Martha's grave, looking out over the land that the Shoshone women had blessed with their ceremony. The gifts they'd left were carefully arranged on Martha's headstone, a gesture that seemed to connect his past and present in ways he was only beginning to understand. I hope I'm doing the right thing, Martha, he said quietly to the gathering. Darkness, these people showed us kindness when they could have chosen hatred. Someone has to stand up for what's right. Behind him, Thomas approached with the quiet footsteps he'd developed since his mother's death. Pa, are we really going to leave if there's more trouble? Sam put his arm around his son's shoulders, feeling the boy's tension and fear. I don't know, Thomas. I honestly don't know. What neither of them could see in the gathering darkness was the figure watching from the ridgeline, Ayanna, who had witnessed the entire confrontation from a safe distance. She had come to check on the family that had saved her daughter's life, and instead had seen them threatened and endangered because of their kindness as she made her way back toward the reservation. Ayanna's mind was already working on a plan that would either save the Carter family or destroy them all. The blessing ceremony had been meant to protect Sam and Thomas, but it had instead painted targets on their backs. Now it was time for a different kind of medicine, the kind that required courage, sacrifice, and a willingness to risk everything for the chance of peace. The 2 weeks Sam had bargained for were about to become the most crucial 14 days in the history of the Wyoming Territory, days that would determine whether fear or hope would shape the future of two peoples learning to live as neighbors in an unforgiving land. 9 days into Sam's 2-week bargain with Wheeler, the attacks stopped as suddenly as they had begun. No more poisoned wells, no more dead livestock, no more mysterious incidents that could be blamed on the reservation tribes. The silence was so complete that even Wheeler's most vocal supporters began to whisper questions among themselves. But Sam found no peace in the quiet. If anything, the lack of incidents made him more nervous, not less. He knew Wheeler and his men were watching, waiting for any excuse to declare the bargain void and exact their promised retribution. Every morning Sam rode the boundaries of his property, checking for signs of trouble and finding nothing but the ordinary challenges of ranch life in territorial Wyoming. It was on the 10th day that Sheriff Coleman arrived with news that changed everything. Sam, I need you to sit down for this, Coleman said, his weathered face grim with the weight of what he'd discovered. Thomas, who had been mending harness in the kitchen, looked up with the alert expression of a boy who had learned to read adult faces for signs of danger. Sam motioned for his son to stay and listen. Whatever Coleman had to say would affect them both. I found out who's been attacking the white families, Coleman said without preamble. It wasn't the Shoshone. Sam felt his world shift slightly on its axis. What do you mean? I mean the arrow wounds on Patterson's bull were made with steel points, the kind you buy at the trading post. Not the traditional flint points the tribes still use for hunting. The poison in the Hendricks well was strychnine, which has to be purchased from a medicine supplier in Cheyenne. These weren't Indian raids, Sam, they were staged. The implications hit Sam like a physical blow. Staged by who? Coleman's expression grew even more grim. That's where it gets complicated. I can't prove it yet, but I have strong suspicions about Wheeler and some of his men. Think about it. Who benefits most from escalating tensions between whites and Indians? Who's been pushing hardest for military intervention on the reservation? Lance Thomas looked confused. Why would Mr. Wheeler want to hurt his own people? Because, Sam said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. If the government decides the Indians are too dangerous to leave on their reservation, they'll move them somewhere else, and all that reservation land will be opened up for white settlement. Coleman nodded grimly. Wheeler's been quietly buying up land rights and mineral claims all around the reservation boundary. If the Shoshone gets relocated, he stands to make a fortune. A few fake Indian attacks would be a small price to pay for that kind of payoff. The revelation was staggering in its implications. Sam thought of Ayanna and little Kimimela, of grandmother Winona and all the women who had blessed his land with their sacred ceremony. They had been blamed for attacks they hadn't committed, painted as hostiles, while the real threat came from their own neighbors. What are you going to do? Sam asked. I'm still gathering evidence. But Sam, this puts you in even more danger than before. If Wheeler realizes I'm investigating, if he suspects you know the truth, ... Double quotes. Coleman didn't need to finish the sentence. Sam understood perfectly. A man willing to stage fake Indian attacks to steal reservation land wouldn't hesitate to eliminate an inconvenient witness. There's something else, Coleman continued reluctantly. I heard talk in town that Wheeler's planning something for the end of your 2-week period, even though there haven't been any more attacks. He's claiming that's proof you warned the Indians to lay low until the heat dies down. That's ridiculous, Thomas protested. We haven't even seen any Indians since the ceremony. Doesn't matter what's true, son, Coleman replied sadly. What matters is what people believe, and Wheeler's very good at making people believe what serves his purposes. After Coleman left, Sam spent the evening walking his property, trying to make sense of everything he'd learned. The gifts from the blessing ceremony caught the last light of day, their colors seeming to glow with an inner fire. Each item represented hours of work, generations of tradition, and most importantly, the hope that kindness could bridge the gap between different peoples. Now, that hope seemed naive, almost foolish in the face of the calculated greed and hatred that really drove the territorial conflicts. Men like Wheeler didn't want peace. They profited from war, from fear, from the suffering of innocent families on both sides of the cultural divide. As he stood beside Martha's grave, watching stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, Sam made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks ago. If the truth about Wheeler's staged attacks ever came to light, it would vindicate both him and the Shoshone people. But waiting for that vindication might cost lives. Thomas's life, Iona's life, the lives of everyone caught in the crossfire of Wheeler's manufactured war. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Sam was repairing a section of fence when he saw them approaching 3 Shoshone men on horseback, riding openly across his land in broad daylight. The sight made his blood run cold. If Wheeler's men saw native people on his property, it would be all the excuse they needed to declare the bargain broken. The lead rider was a man Sam didn't recognize, perhaps 40 years old, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. The other 2 were younger, armed but not in a threatening manner. They approached slowly, hands visible, but their faces were grave with purpose. You are the one called Sam Carter, the leader said in careful English. I am Joseph Running Bear, war chief of the Northern Shoshone. We need to speak. Sam glanced nervously toward the ridge where Wheeler's men might be watching. You shouldn't be here. It's not safe for any of us. Nowhere is safe now, Running Bear replied grimly. That is why I have come. My daughter Iona told me of your kindness too, little butterfly, of the ceremony that blessed your land. But she also told me of the threats against your family. I can handle my own problems, Sam said, though he appreciated the concern. Running Bear studied him with eyes that seemed to see far more than his words revealed. The men who threaten you also threaten my people. They spread lies about raids we did not make, attacks we did not commit. They prepare for war against ghosts of their own creation. The war chief's words confirmed what Coleman had told him, but hearing it from a Shoshone leader carried different weight. These people knew they were being blamed for crimes they hadn't committed, knew that war was coming regardless of their innocence. What do you want from me? Sam asked. Truth, Running Bear replied simply. When the time comes, and it will come soon, someone must stand up and speak the truth about what really happened. Someone the white authorities might believe. Sam understood the request, and the terrible responsibility that came with it. By accepting the war chief's trust, he would be committing himself and Thomas to a path that might well lead to their destruction. But the alternative, allowing innocent people to suffer for crimes they hadn't committed, was unthinkable. If I can prove the truth, Sam said carefully, I'll speak it. But I won't put my son in danger unnecessarily. Running Bear nodded. With respect, a man who does not protect his children is not a man at all. But sometimes protecting our children means fighting for the world we want them to inherit. As the 3 Shoshone riders prepared to leave, Running Bear turned back with one final message. The blessing ceremony was not just gratitude for saving one child's life. It was recognition that you and your son have the hearts of bridge builders. In the dark times coming, the world will need such hearts. After they disappeared over the ridge, Sam stood alone in his pasture, feeling the weight of expectations from all sides pressing down on him like a physical burden. Tomorrow marked the end of his 2-week bargain with Wheeler. In less than 2 hours, he would learn whether his gamble had bought safety or merely delayed the inevitable reckoning. What he couldn't know was that Wheeler had no intention of honoring their agreement, regardless of the evidence. The absence of Indian attacks had actually accelerated the land speculator's timeline. He needed to provoke a crisis before people started asking too many questions about who really benefited from the current tensions. The morning would bring, not resolution, but the beginning of the most dangerous phase of a conflict that had been brewing since the first. Blessing ceremony transformed a grieving widower into an unwitting symbol of hope in a territory balanced on the knife's edge of war. The 14th day of Sam's bargain dawned clear and cold, with frost covering the prairie grass like scattered diamonds in the early morning light. Sam had barely finished his morning chores when he spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. Not just Wheeler and his usual gang, but what looked like half the territory's white male population, all riding hard toward his ranch. Thomas saw them too. his young face pale but determined. "Pa, there's got to be 30 men out there." 43, Sam corrected grimly, having counted them as they crested the ridge. Wheeler's called in every favor he's got. But as the mob approached, Sam noticed something unexpected. Sheriff Coleman was riding alongside them, and behind the main group came several other riders, men Sam recognized as more moderate voices in the territorial community. Dr. Harrison from Sweetwater Creek, Judge Montgomery from the county seat, even Reverend Phillips from the Methodist Church. The two groups separated as they reached Sam's property. Wheeler's vigilantes forming their familiar, intimidating semicircle, while the more respectable citizens remained at a distance, clearly uncomfortable with the proceedings but unwilling to intervene directly. "Time's up, Carter," Wheeler called, that house voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. 2 weeks of peace, just like you promised. Of course, we all know why the attacks stopped. You warned your savage friends to lay low until the heat died down. That's not what happened, Sam replied steadily, and you know it. Do I? Then maybe you can explain this. Wheeler reached into his saddlebag and pulled out what appeared to be a beaded pouch, the kind Sam recognized from the gifts left after the blessing ceremony. "Well, found this at the site of the Morrison family's burned barn. Happened 3 nights ago, about 10 miles north of here. Guess your Indian friends couldn't resist one last raid before skipping back to the reservation." Sam's blood ran cold. I hadn't heard about any attack on the Morrison family, and the timing was too convenient to be coincidental. But the beaded pouch in Wheeler's hand looked authentic, the kind of detailed craftwork that would take weeks to create. "That proves nothing," Sam said, but he could hear the uncertainty in his own voice. Wheeler smiled coldly. "Proves enough for me. The deal's off. Carter, you've got 1 hour to pack what you can carry and get out of the territory. Hold on there, Wheeler." The voice belonged to Judge Montgomery, who urged his horse forward with the careful dignity of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "I don't see any legal authority for evicting a man from his own property." "Don't need legal authority when we're dealing with traitors and Indian sympathizers," Judge Harrison replied hotly. "This is about survival. This is about a land grab," Sheriff Coleman said suddenly, his words cutting through the tension like a knife through silence, "and I can prove it." Wheeler's face went white, then red with fury. "What the hell are you talking about, Coleman?" "I'm talking about staged attacks, Frank. Fake Indian raids designed to stir up hatred and justify military action against the reservation." Coleman's voice carried the authority of his badge and the weight of carefully gathered evidence. "Steel arrowheads instead of flint, store-bought poison instead of traditional methods, and a remarkable pattern of attacks that just happened to target properties adjacent to your recent land purchases." The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder. Smoke. Wheeler's men exchanged uncertain glances, while the respectable citizens moved closer, clearly interested in what the sheriff had to say. "You're out of your mind," Wheeler snarled, but there was desperation in his voice now. "Am I? Then maybe you can explain how that beaded pouch you're holding happens to be machine-stitched instead of hand-sewn like authentic Indian crafts, or maybe you can explain why the Morrison barn that supposedly burned 3 nights ago is still standing. I rode past it this morning." The lie exposed, Wheeler reached for his gun, but Coleman was faster. The sheriff's Colt appeared in his hand, with practiced ease, covering Wheeler before the land speculator could clear leather. "That's enough, Frank. You and your men are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and inciting violence against peaceful citizens." What happened next would be debated in saloons and churches throughout the territory for years to come. Instead of surrendering, Wheeler spurred his horse forward, clearly intending to ride Sam down and escape in the confusion. But he had forgotten about Thomas, who stepped out of the ranch house at that moment carrying his father's old Henry rifle. The boy didn't shoot. He was barely 12 years old and had never drawn a weapon on another human being. But the sight of him standing there, protecting his home with the same quiet courage his mother had shown in life, stopped Wheeler's charge as effectively as a bullet. In that moment of hesitation, Running Bear and 20 Shoshone warriors crested the ridge, behind Wheeler's men, their presence shifting the balance of power completely. They had been watching, waiting to see if the white authorities would finally enforce justice, ready to intervene if Sam and Thomas were threatened. "Seems like you're outnumbered," Wheeler, Coleman observed dryly. The confrontation ended not with violence but with handcuffs. Wheeler and 3 of his closest associates were arrested on the spot, while the rest of his followers scattered like leaves before a prairie wind. Judge Montgomery took formal statements from everyone present, including Running Bear, whose testimony about the staged attacks would later prove crucial in federal court. As the crowd dispersed and order was restored, Sam found himself standing on his porch with Thomas, Sheriff Coleman, and Ayanna, who had arrived with her father's warriors. Little Kimmy Miller ran up to Thomas with the same joyful energy she'd shown during the blessing ceremony, chattering excitedly about the morning's dramatic events. "I should have trusted the blessing," Sam said quietly, looking out over his land, where frost was giving way to morning sunshine. "Your grandmother said this place would be protected by the prayers of many women. She was right." Ayanna smiled, her dark eyes reflecting relief and something deeper, perhaps the beginning of a friendship that could bridge to worlds. The blessing was real, Sam Carter. But blessings must be protected by brave hearts and honest voices. Today you proved you have both. Judge Montgomery approached with official documents that would clear Sam's name and establish the truth about Wheeler's conspiracy. Mr. Carter, I want to apologize on behalf of the territorial government for what you've endured. Your courage in standing up for what's right has prevented what could have been a devastating war. But Sam was looking at Thomas, who stood talking quietly with Kimimela in a mixture of English and the Shoshone words she'd been teaching him. The boy's face held none of the fear or hatred that had poisoned so much of the territorial conflicts. Instead, he showed the same open curiosity and natural kindness that Martha had possessed. Judge Sam said thoughtfully, "What this territory needs isn't apologies, it needs bridges. People who can stand between two worlds and help them understand each other. You have something in mind." Sam looked at his son, at Iana and her daughter, at the gifts from the blessing ceremony that still adorned his porch. "I think I do, but it's going to take time, patience, and a lot of people willing to choose hope over fear." 6 months later, the Carter Ranch had become an unofficial meeting place where white settlers and Shoshone families gathered to trade goods, share knowledge, and build the kind of understanding that prevents wars. Thomas had become fluent in the Shoshone language, while Kimimela's English rivaled that of children twice her age. Sam never remarried, but he was no longer alone. The community that grew around his ranch was Martha's legacy as much as his own, a testament to her belief that kindness creates more kindness, like ripples spreading across still water. The blessing ceremony that had started it all was remembered not as a single day of dancing and prayers, but as the beginning of something larger, proof that courage and compassion could triumph over hatred and greed, even in the harsh landscape of the American frontier. In the end, the widowed rancher's simple act of giving medicine to a sick native girl had done more than save one child's life. It had planted seeds of peace that would grow for generations, nourished by the prayers of many grandmothers and protected by the brave hearts of bridge builders in a land that desperately needed both.